Masechet Nazir Daf Yod Chet. We've been discussing the differences between a regular Nazir who is tahor and then becomes tameh in the middle, and someone who begins his Nazirut in a cemetery, in which case he was never tahor. He starts off tameh and then becomes tahor. And the main difference is that someone who is tameh, someone who is tahor, regular Nazir is tahor, and becomes tameh in the middle, has to wait 7 days so he can become purified, and he shaves on the 7th day and brings the 3 korbanot, 2 birds and an animal, on the 8th day. Okay, that's for sure. Someone who begins his Nazirut in the cemetery, he surely does not bring any korbanot. That everyone agrees to. The question that Rav Ashi asked at the end of the daf yesterday was, how about the shaving? Someone who became a Nazir in a cemetery, does he have to shave on the 7th day or not? Does the shaving come hand in hand with the korbanot, and he doesn't do korbanot, so he doesn't have to shave either? Or is it a separate matter, and he does shave? All right, we attempted a few different answers yesterday that were not conclusive. We're going to finish off that discussion today with a conclusive, pretty clear, explicit braita. Tashema, v'timeh rosh nizro, betahor shenitma katuv medaber. Pasuk says, if someone becomes tameh when they are Nazir, so timeh rosh nizro, that means that the hair on his head will become tameh. So that phrase means he will cut his hair. So surely that person cuts his hair, and the Midrash says this is talking about only a Nazir that was tahor who became tameh in the middle of his Nazirut period. Shehu ta'un ha'abarat se'ar v'aba'at siporin. He, and only he, has to shave his hair and bring the birds as korbanot. V'liftor et ha-nazir ba'keber she'en ta'un ha'abarat se'ar v'aba'at siporin. And this derivation excludes a Nazir ba'keber, someone who became a Nazir while impure, while in the cemetery. That person, he does not even, since his Nazirut did not even begin, he didn't even get to day 1. Therefore, he does not have to shave and does not have to bring any of the korbanot. All right, so that's pretty clear. No, he does not have to shave. The Baraita, however, continues and explains why we even need this pasuk, because I would have thought otherwise based on logic. טעון הברת שיער והבעת ציפורין, מי שהטמא מתחילה אינו דין שיהיה טעון הברת שיער והבעת ציפורין. I might have thought as follows: if someone who was tahor, so that's a good thing, and only just became tameh later, he is required to shave his head. It could be she also. I'm just saying he is required to shave his head and bring korbanot. So, all the more so, someone who was never tahor, he started off tameh. Isn't that worse? Isn't that more severe? So surely that person will have to shave and bring korbanot. That's what I might have thought. That's why the pasuk goes out of its way and says, Tamud Omar, v'timeh rosh nizro. Only his hair has to be cut. A specific person to exclude a category, to exclude another category. במי שהיה טהור ונטמא כתוב מדמר שיהיה טעון הברת שיער והבעת ציפורין ולפטור את הנזיר בקבר שמאמינה. And so we conclude as we began that this pasuk says only someone who was tahor and became tameh, that's what the pasuk is talking about, they have to shave and bring korbanot. But someone who was a Nazir, who was tameh to begin with, because they were in a grave, became a Nazir then, does not have to do either of them, and that is a conclusive answer for Rav Ashi. All right, excellent. Next, we're going to go back to a baraita that we already quoted at least 3 times, and ask who is the author of this baraita. Man tana ha de tanu rabanan. En ben tameh shenazar lenazir tahor shenitma, ela shetameh shenazar shvi'i shelo ole lo min haminyan, venazir tahor shenitma en shvi'i shelo ole lo min haminyan. This baraita, if we remember, taught that there is no difference between someone who was tameh in the cemetery who became a Nazir, and someone who was tahor and became tameh. Right, they are similar in many ways, but one of the differences is well, this is the only difference, but there are related differences to this. That the one difference is that the one who was tameh and became a nazir, he can start counting on the seventh day already, whereas the one who was tahor and became tameh cannot start counting on the seventh day. He has to wait till after he brings the korbanot on the eighth day, and that makes sense because since that the one who was tahor has to bring korbanot, so he's not out of the woods, he's not finished his purification process until the eighth day. He can only start counting the new one on the eighth day. Whereas the Nazir, the Nazir Bakeved, since he doesn't bring korbanot, so he's finished everything he needs to do on the very seventh day. We just saw he doesn't even have to shave. So, but the shaving anyway would be on the seventh day, but he doesn't have to bring korbanot. And so, therefore, he's done on the seventh day, so he can start counting on the seventh day. So, Amar Rav Chisda, Rebihi, Damar Rebi, en Nizirut Tahora Chala, Ela Ad Hashemini. So, Rav Chisda says this baraita has to be the opinion of Rebi. We're going to see in a second the full machloket down here, but we're previewing here already. Rebi says that a Nazir who was Tahor and became Tameh, that the Nizirut does not start until the eighth. So this has to be him because in this braita it says Nazir that was tahor starts on the eighth. That makes sense. Rabbi also says that it starts on the eighth. That's when he starts counting the next one, starts continuing to count. That's when he starts counting. Anything that he had before, anything that he counted before is cancelled, and now we can start on the eighth day. Whereas Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says that the Nizirut of Tahara starts on the seventh, even though he has to bring korbanot on the eighth. Okay, that's a side point. He brings korbanot, but the seventh day he finished the full days of waiting. And so we can start counting. See, so according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, both types of Niziri, Nizirut Tahara and Nizirut Bakever, are both can start counting on the seventh day. So he surely cannot be the author of this baraita. Now, what is this machloket? Mai Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Let's find the source for it. Here's the baraita. Tetanya v'kidash et rosho bayom hahu. So he sanctifies his head. The kidash et rosho is the opposite of timeh et rosho. This means he can now not cut his hair, but let his hair grow. So letting his hair grow indicates the beginning of counting of Nizirut. On that day, it says bayom hahu. So what is that day referring to? It's ambiguous. Bayom hava'at korbanotav divrei Rabbi says, that day means the day that he brings his korbanot. That's the eighth day. You have to wait till the eighth day to start counting. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, b'yom tiglachto. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, however, says, no, on the day that he shaves. We're talking about a tahor. So he shaves on the tahor becomes tameh. He shaves on the seventh day. And the Bayom Hahu is referring to that seventh day. He can start counting. And so now we understand why it has to be Rabbi. Okay, now another Mishnah has a related halacha from Masechet Karetot. Have'aha ditnan, Nazir shenitma tum'ot harbe, eno mevi ela korban ehad. The Mishnah there taught that a Nazir who becomes tameh lamet multiple times only brings one korban. So this has to mean some case where he became a Nazir, he became tameh lamet, and became purified, or almost purified, and then at some point, we're going to see exactly when, became tameh met again. See, if he becomes tameh met like every day, he's just in the cemetery, every day he's going in and out of the cemetery, then he never becomes tahor. Surely at the end, let's say he does that for 100 days, 200 days, so then at the end of 200 days, finally he can do the process, stay out of the cemetery, and get sprinkled on the third and the seventh day, go to the mikveh on the seventh day, then shave on the seventh day, bring korbanot on the eighth day. Surely that case, he would only bring one set of korbanot, because he was just tameh for one long period. So we're talking about a case here that he becomes tameh multiple periods, like he purified or almost purified himself, became tameh again, did some kind of 7 days, almost purified, but didn't bring the korbanot yet, and becomes tameh again. So you might have thought that he has to bring as many sets of korbanot as the number of periods that he became tameh. So this means Hachi teaches that no, only one at the end. All right. So now Mantana, who is the author of this Mishnah? Amar Rav Chisda, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Damar Nezirut Tahora Meshivi'i Hayla Umashkachat La Kegon Shenitma Beshivi'i Vechazav Nitma Beshivi'i. So Rav Chisda says this Mishnah has to be Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, who said that you start counting the new Nizirut on the 7th day of purification from being Tameh. And therefore, the case is easy to explain. You have someone who was Tahor. He became Tameh. He did the 7 days. On the 7th day, he can start counting the next one. Now, he didn't bring his Korbanot yet on the 8th day. And then he suddenly becomes Tameh again later on the 7th day. And so now he's going to start again, a new process, wait another 7 days. And so you might have thought that, oh, look, he was Chayav Korbanot in the first one. Now he's going to be Chayav Korbanot in the second one. And no, this Mishnah teaches, in that case, only one set of Korbanot. So this makes sense for the Biyoseh. Kevan de lo yasa sha'ah ruya lavi korban eno chayav ela korban echad. And the reason is because the time never arrived that he could bring korbanot, since he became tameh already on the 7th, and you can't bring korbanot on the 7th. You have to wait till the 8th day to bring korbanot. Therefore, that liability for korbanot never set in. And then when he becomes tameh on that 7th day, which is the first day of his next Nazirut, so he is already in a new cycle of Nazirut. That's why it's yet another cycle, another violation of becoming tameh. But since the liability for korbanot never applied, because the day when he could bring korbanot didn't set in yet, so therefore that is held in abeyance until he becomes tahor again, and then he'll only have to bring one set of korbanot at the end of however many times this cycle goes on. So all that is good for the Biyoseh. And I'll show you why it doesn't work for the B. In parentheses, you can go on as many times as you want. So according to the B, if it would be that case, he's tahor, he becomes tameh, he does the 7-day process of tahara, and then he becomes tameh again on the 7th day. According to the B, you don't start counting the new cycle until the 8th day. And so if he become tameh every 7th day, kuluhu tumah arichtahi, that's just one long tum'ah. And obviously, for one long tum'ah, 100 days, 200 days, it would only bring one set of korbanot at the end, right? We need a case where he began counting the new cycle, so that this Mishnah could make sense. Now, so I know, so you'll say, it became tameh on the 8th day, and that's when he starts counting the new cycle. And again on the 8th day, but that can't be either, because, well, if you already brought his korbanot, then it's a moot point, because he already brought them. The question is, what if it's on the 8th day before he actually brought the korbanot? In that case, already a time came when it's appropriate to bring a korban. He can bring korban on the 8th day, and since he could bring a korban, so he already sets in a liability to bring 3 animals, 2 birds, 1 animal, on that day, and now it became tameh again, so he can't bring it anymore on that day, but that's already chalked up as he's responsible for one set of korbanot, and then when he goes into the next cycle, and on that 8th day, he'll have to bring another set of korbanot, and if he becomes tameh on that 8th day, then he's going to have to wait yet another cycle, and that day he'll have to bring 3 sets of korbanot. So you see, according to the B, it can't work. It can't be on the 7th day because he didn't start counting a new cycle. It can't be on the 8th day because then he's already liable to yet another set of korbanot. All right, good. Now that we understand that, let's see the reason, the source. My tama did it be? Amar kera v'chiper alav me'asher hata al hanefesh v'hadar v'kidash et rosho. Let's look at this pasuk inside so we can see the full context. We're talking about on the 8th day, a person brings 2 birds, and here it says, Ve'asa kohen, echad lechatat ve'echad olah. 1 bird is a chatat, 1 bird is an olah. And then, V'chiper alav me'asher chata al hanafish. And so these birds, the chatat especially, both of them, will be atonement for the sin that he made for becoming tameh lamet. Good. V'kidash et rosho, and then sanctify his head, meaning his hair will grow. That's a key word for saying he can start counting counting that day. continuing, Bayomahu, on that day. So here's the question. This Bayomahu, what is it referring to? It is ambiguous. Rabbi is going to say Bayomahu refers to the Korbanot. See, on the day that he brings the Korbanot, that's when he can start counting. Whereas the Yosef is going to say, no, it says Kiddush et Rosho. That's on the 7th day. So Bayomahu is referring to not the day of Korbanot, but this immediately preceding that day when he starts growing his hair. So that's the question. Bayomahu, when does he start counting? When he starts when he shaves his head, and that means he could start growing the next hair. That's on the 7th day, or after Korbanot on the 8th day. So let's see that inside. So here, the B says, the Pasuk says, first you bring the Korbanot, and after that, in the Pasuk it says that he can allow his hair to start growing, meaning start counting, right? Although the B agrees that he shaves on the 7th day, but it's not considered now you start growing until the 8th day. Whereas Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, im ken lema kera v'kidash et rosho. Rabbi Yosef says you wouldn't have to say bayomahu. You don't need those extra words. Just say he brings the korbanot, and then kidash et rosho means he starts counting. Why bayomahu? Bayomahu seems to be referring to a different day, not that very day of korbanot, but on that day when he started growing his hair, because he shaved it on the 7th day. So it's on the 7th day that he starts the counting. That's the Bayomahu, right? And he's explaining further. Bayomahu, lamali, imeno inyan lashemini, teneu inyan lashebi'i. Why do I need Bayomahu? It can't be referring to the 8th day, because the first half of the Pasuk said he brings his korbanot. That's on the 8th day, right? The Pasuk right before says, Ubayom hashemini, yavi sheteh torim. So the whole context is the 8th day. So just say that, then he starts counting. You don't have to say anything about Bayomahu. So since Bayomahu is not referring to the 8th day, it must be talking about something else. It must be talking about the 7th day. Good. Rabbi, hey, we have a good question for you. What are you going to do with those extra words here? Bayomahu. Amalach Rabbi, Rabbi says, even if he didn't yet bring his korbanot on the 8th day, he still starts counting on the 8th day. For example, let's say he didn't bring his korbanot because he became tameh. Lamet, before he got a chance to bring his korbanot. Nevertheless, that starts the count as day 1, and that's why, well, when he becomes tamemet, that's immediately going to stop it. But it is a new cycle. So now we understand the source, now we understand the mechanism of why the B says it's a new cycle even before he brings the korbanot, but only if the 8th day began. Okay, now, V'Rav Chisda, Mai Duchke Lukmeh Kerebi Yoseh Berebi Yehuda. Now, back to Rav Chisda, who said that Mishnah in Keretot was the opinion of Rabbi Yoseh Berebi Yehuda, because that's on the 7th day, that's when he starts counting. That made sense. Lukma kegon dinitma de hazya belel shemini v'rebihi. Wait, Rav Chisda didn't have to push himself to limit the Mishnah to be only one opinion. He could actually say it's Rabbi also. For example, in the case where he became tameh on the night of the 8th, meaning before the 8th day. Because after all, you can't bring any korbanot at night. You only bring korbanot during the day. So if he finished, he did 7, shaved on the 7th day, and then that night he became tameh. So that night is already the beginning of the 8th day, and we just said, according to the B, you start counting on the 8th day, right? Bayomahu, even before you bring the korbanot. So at night, he didn't bring the korbanot. He couldn't yet bring the korbanot, yet he starts his new cycle. If he becomes tameh at night, well then he, on the one hand, he starts a new cycle. On the other hand, the obligation for bringing the korbanot does not yet set in because he can't possibly bring it until the daytime. So when the B said before that that once the possibility of bringing the korbanot sets in, then he chalks it up and he has to bring it no matter what. He'll have to bring it, the next time around if he can't bring it now. But in this case, the possibility did not set in because daytime didn't start yet. So therefore, our Mishnah could be in a case where he becomes tameh after the 7th day at night before the daytime of the 8th. Okay, so let's try to answer it. No, midela mokim la kerebi lema kasaba lelia la mechusar zeman hu. But since Rav Chisda did not say that our Mishnah is like Rabbi, it must be that he thinks that a nighttime is not considered a lack of time. Meaning, although in practice he cannot bring his korbanot at night because the Beit HaMikdash is closed, but nevertheless, it's in potential. It is a time for bringing korbanot, so that's why it cannot be to be. That's why Rav Chisda said it cannot be to be. It must be. He thinks that. This is a big question about how you view the nighttime. Is it that the possibility of korbanot does not yet set in, so therefore the whole obligation does not yet set in, and so he's not going to tally up? Or no, it must be that the reason Rav Chisda says it's not like Rabbi is because he thinks that the nighttime before is a time of obligation of korbanot. Happens to be closed, so I can't bring it now, but really you could bring it, and that's why he said it's not like Rabbi, because according to Rabbi, even if he becomes tameh at night, already it would tally up. Yes, he has to bring a whole set of korbanot for this period of tumah. If it became tameh that night, he would have to bring yet another set the next time around. So can we conclude that Rav Chisda thinks that the nighttime is a possible time of bringing korbanot? Rav Ada says no, you cannot do that, because these two things are dependent on each other. Whether it's possible, whether it's considered a time of obligation of korbanot, it goes hand in hand with whether you start counting whether you start counting the continuation of Nizirut. If you say that the nighttime is not a possible time of bringing korbanot, and so then when can you bring korban? In the morning. In that case, day one of the new Nazirut cycle would only be in the morning, at sunrise. And if you say that the nighttime is not a problem of bringing korbanot, it's not a time that you cannot bring korbanot, it's just in practice, practically it's closed, but it is in potential a time period of bringing korbanot. In that case, the Nizirut would start at night. The problem is you start at night, but you are liable to these korbanot automatically at night, no matter what, and therefore the Mishnah wouldn't make sense, because Mishnah says only one at the end. According to this, you'd have to bring many sets at the end. And so we don't know. Either way, whatever Rav Chisda thinks, whether the nighttime is considered a potential time of korbanot or not a potential time of korbanot, either way, he could not say that this Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi. Okay, good. So now that we mentioned that baraita about the Nazir who became tameh many times, we're going to look more into it in terms of this baraita that's also found in the Tosefta. Nitma b'shevi'i v'chazar v'nitma b'shevi'i eno mevi ela korban ehad. Nitma b'shemini v'chazar v'nitma b'shemini mevi korban al kol ehad ve'ehad. So this baraita is elaborating on that Mishnah in Keretot, and says if someone became tameh, it's Komet Nazir, who was tahor, he became tameh, and then on the seventh day he became tameh again, and again on the seventh day he only brings one korban. That makes sense of the explanation of Rav Chisda earlier, following Rabbi Yosef. And if he became tameh on the eighth day, and then once again on the eighth day, he has to bring korban for every single time period, because once the eighth day starts, he already is obligated to bring that korban, even if he didn't actually bring it. He is liable, so if he becomes tameh before he brings it, he's going to have to bring it instead the next time around, in addition to the new one that he'll have to bring. Matchil umoneh miyad divrei Rabbi Eliezer. He has to start counting immediately. It's not clear what immediately refers to. Some say the eighth day, some say it means the seventh day. So let's go with the seventh day. I think that's an easier way to explain it. According to Rabbi Eliezer, therefore, no matter what, whether it became tameh on the seventh day or tameh on the eighth day, in general, he became tameh, he waited, seventh day, he starts counting, no matter what. If he became tameh on the seventh day, then the next time around, brings only one korban. If he became tameh on the 8th day, because that the obligation already set in, so then he has to bring 2 sets of korbanot. Okay, so this is Rabbi Eliezer. This, so far, is exactly what Rabbi Yosef said, and how Rav Chisda interpreted that Mishnah. So he actually could have said it's also the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. It would have been the same thing. They agree with each other. But now this Baraita is going to show that there are yet a couple of more different opinions. Hachamim omerim korban echad al hakol ad sheyavi hatato. Hachamim say, forget about all that potential that he could have brought a korban that makes him have to bring another set of korbanot. No, not true. As long as he did not yet actually bring his korban, he's not obligated to bring yet another set. In other words, if he becomes tameh after he brought the korbanot, then yeah, for sure, that's what it's about to say. Hevi chatato ve'nitma, mevi korban al kol echad ve'echad. If he became tameh, he was tubas tahor. He became tameh, and he does the 7th day, the 8th day, he brings the korban hatat. This is specifically the korban hatat. According to Chamim, is the main korban. And not the asham. That's not as important. So if he brought the korban hatat, then that's it. He brought it. He has to bring the other korbanot that are together with it. And then if it becomes tameh after the korban hatat, he's going to have to bring yet another set 8 days later. However, if he did not yet bring his korban hatat, and even if it's on the 8th day, he became tameh, then he just waits another 7 days, and on the 8th day, he brings only 1 set. So it's not the potential possibility of the time period when he could have brought a korban that makes him liable to another set, but rather only if he actually brought the chatat, then he has to complete that set and bring another one the next time around. So that's why it says 1 korban on everything. One korban all the way at the end on everything, no matter what. No matter if it became tameh on the 7th day or 8th day, Hachamim say only the korban chatat matters. Hevi chatato velo hevi ashamo moneh. If he brought the korban chatat and didn't yet bring the korban asham, the korban asham is a side dish. You have to bring it at some point, but that's not what stops the previous time period. The chatat is the one that's mechaper, that brings atonement for having been tameh met, and therefore he begins the count as long as he brought the korban chatat, even if he didn't bring the korban asham yet, and became tameh between the chatat and the asham. Well, he couldn't bring the asham anymore because now he's tameh. He'll have to bring it the next time. Okay, Rabbi Ishmael ben Osher Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka Omer Keshem shachatato ikabto ken ashamo me'akevo. Rabbi Ishmael says, no, you need both the chatat and the asham. Remember, there's also an olah, a bird, and no one thinks you have to bring the bird. The bird is an extra gift offering, but that does not. The atonement does not depend on the olah, but rather the maximum opinion is Rabbi Ishmael. Well, he would be in fact the most lenient. In other words, you're not finished until you bring both the chatat and the asham. So if he brought the chatat and then became tameh, well, then he doesn't start counting the new one, and so 7 days later, that's all one long period of tumah. So he only has to bring 1 set of korbanot at the end of that period. Unless he brought both the chatat and the asham, then that finishes the old period. It doesn't matter if he brought the olah yet or not, and he starts counting. So if it became tameh after he brought the chatat and asham, then he'll have to bring another set, according to Rabbi Ishmael. Okay, that's the end of the Braita. Let's analyze. Bishlama Rabbi Eliezer amar keravi kidash et rosho bayom hahu afal pi shelo hevi korbenotav. So Rabbi Eliezer, the first opinion, says that he sanctifies his hair. That means he starts counting on that day. What was bayom hahu? Bayom hahu means, even as we said before, it's referring to some previous time period, because obviously not referring to afterwards, and you wouldn't have to say the word bayom hahu. Extra words bayom hahu says it's referring back to the 7th day. Even before he brought the korbanot, he already starts counting, and that's why he would have to, as long as he had the potential to bring the korbanot, meaning he became tameh on the 8th day, then he has to bring yet another set. It became tameh on the seventh day, even the potential wasn't there. So this goes like the Mishnah above. That's all about potential. But Rabbanan hahu afapi shelo hevi ashamo. No, Rabbanan says no. The word bayom hahu is coming to exclude the asham. That he starts counting the new day once the chatat happens, and it's only the chatahu is zeroing in on the chatat offering, and even if you didn't bring the asham, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we understand both of those opinions. Ela Rabbi Ishmael, hahu lamali. According to Rabbi Ishmael, you have to bring your chatat and the asham, and then you could start counting. So what's this bayomahu? What is it coming to add? I really don't need it at all. It's obvious that he's going to only start counting after those korbanot. So Rabbi Ishmael can explain. I need the word hahu to say he starts counting then, even before he brought the olah. So hahu is referring to some previous time period, because the pasuk already mentioned the olah. So it's be'om hahu, before the olah. Okay. So Rabbi Ishmael can explain it. Now we ask according to the Banan, why don't you say like that and just say that the hahu is excluding the olah, but not excluding the asham? Rabbanan, olah la ba'emiuta doron be'almahu. Rabbanan says, no, it's obvious. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that the olah is not necessary for purification, because that's simply a gift. Doron. Doron comes from a Greek word that means gift, and so therefore I don't need the word bayamahu. Therefore, the word bayamahu must be excluding the asham. That is not necessary. Okay, good. Now, my ta'amahu Rabbanan. We're still not satisfied with the explanation of Rabbanan, and the reason is because look at the next pasuk. See, it says the asham. This was the echad chatat v'echad olah. That's the two birds. V'chiped alav, as we saw. So now we understand the word v'chiped alav is really only going on chatat, and not according to olah, at least according to the first two opinions of the Baraita. And that's what we've been discussing so far. But here's the thing: look at the asham. So hizir Hashem et yemei nizro, that indicates that he can restart the days of his counting. Okay, so he restarts days of his counting, and only then it says that he brings the asham offering. And then, okay, so since it says this before asham, so I would already know, see, according to Chachamim, that you start counting before asham. And therefore, the word bayomahu seems to be adding something else, so we still need more clarification for Rabbanan. Okay, so once again, what is the reason for Rabbanan, who says that it's the hatat only? The Tanya vehizir laHashem yemei nizro ve'bi keves ben shanato le'asham mata mulomar. What does this pasuk come to teach? That you start counting before asham. לפי שמסינו שכל השמות שבתורה שהן מעכבים יכול אף זה מעכבו. Here's why I need even this extra phrase, because in the whole rest of the Torah, anytime someone does something that requires an asham, that you have to bring the asham before you can get atonement. There's no other way around it. So that's why I would have thought, so I might have thought here also, that an asham is required, because in general it's a required sacrifice or atonement. That's why the pasuk says, meaning you start counting, and then it says you start bringing the asham to exclude the general rule that happens all the time. Rabbi Ishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka omer vehizir vehevi ematay hizir bizman shehevi. How's Rabbi Ishmael going to explain this? Because according to Rabbi Ishmael, you have to bring the chatat and the asham. So in that case, why does it say the order that first it says you start counting, and only then it says asham? Rabbi Ishmael says I can break it down like this: vehizir, you start counting. When do you start counting? When you bring the asham, but not before. So that's why it's together in this pasuk to say that the counting does depend on asham. So it really just depends on the syntax of the sentence. And the way you parse it, that will be the source of the explanation for the difference between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbanan. Baruch Adonai leolam. Amen ve'amen.